This is Capital Games. I'm the Wiz.
I'm Zero.
So, last week we discussed what we thought the sales projections were going to be for Fire Emblem Engage. We don't know what the numbers are right now. We will find out at some point. We thought we might continue the trend here and start with another game that is coming out fairly soon. We're talking Tuesday the 24th. And that's Forspoken, the often delayed PS5 exclusive title from Square Enix. I guess before we get started, Zero, what were your thoughts on the game before it was being released? I know you possibly played the demo, is that correct?
Yeah. When the demo was available on PS5, I just decided to pull that one just for fun, just to kind of check it out and everything.
What are your thoughts on the game of how it plays and how it was being marketed? And where do you think it was standing before the release date came?
As far as my thoughts on it, it felt like a bit of a slower Devil May Cry with sort of the Ubisoft open world formula. You know, just the map just ticked with all sorts of little markers on objectives you can do, villages you can visit, and whatevers. So I was like, okay, you know, not super quick, super heavy on the reflexes like Devil May Cry, you know. Maybe this is kind of like a action game that's suited for people who might not be too familiar with the action genre. Okay, neat. And then, of course, the English dialogue track. Oh my god, just... The dialogue has the complexity of a teen drama. Something that you would maybe see on the American CW network.
Yeah.
So, not great. And the main heroine, she is chatty, but not in a funny Deadpool clever sort of way, but just in a really bad cringe sort of way. One thing I will note is, for fun, I decided to flip the dialogue to Japanese just to see if the Japanese dialogue was recorded in a sort of different perspective, and oddly enough, the Japanese dialogue makes it feel like an action anime, so it felt kind of tolerable at that point.
Okay. All right, that's good to know. So the things that I started noticing right away is the first reveal of the game. I think it was a state of play about, was it a year or a year and a half ago? Was it state of play? Or was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, somewhere around that time frame.
It didn't look very hot back then. And they were showing off a little bit of the parkour and a little bit of movement and some special abilities, but other than that, it didn't show anything that was really amazing or really that was eye-catching. And for something that is going to be a PS5 exclusive that Square Enix is selling just for PlayStation 5 owners and now PC owners, I thought that was not a great look. And as time went on and as the marketing started going forward for Forspoken, which was pretty quiet until, I would say, 4 weeks ago?
Yeah, right about, because they were releasing trailers showing off some of the gameplay mechanics, some of the lore. I know on the Japanese Square Enix account, they were showing like something like, I guess the best way to describe it would be like an extended version of a commercial that would be airing on like YouTube and stuff like that, but it felt like an extended cut commercial, so not like the standard 30 seconds or anything like that.
Right.
So that was what I noticed on the Japanese Square Enix account.
Okay. The issues started becoming more and more apparent as more marketing started coming up. There were little trailers on social media that were making people laugh at how bad they were. There was some improvement in the graphics, but not enough to justify $70. And then, I think it was a week and a half ago, they announced their PC specs that were insanely bloated. I believe the recommended was a 4080 with 32 gigabytes of RAM, 150 gigabytes of storage, SSD, or through an NVMe. And that you would have to have the most current CPU and GPU in order to play it in its recommended state. Right now, no one's gotten review copies of the PC version, but if we are to look at the PS5 version, when you played the demo, did you think that it was something that would require or that you feel was necessary to have that kind of a beefy rig in order to actually play that?
Well, Before I get into what I thought about the performance on PS5 was, I just want to make the listeners clearly aware that the specs that Wiz was going over, the recommended specs, get this, it was recommended if you're playing the game on PC in 720p. So we're not even talking 4K.
Well,
and that was the spec sheet that they came up with for 720p.
No, the recommended I said was 4K at 60, I think.
No. The website has all those specs, but they're saying that they recommend these specs. I think, if I remember correctly, when I saw it, because I was just like, that is ridiculous. Why would you need those insane sort of specs for 720p? It makes no sense.
The minimum requirements for 720p are Windows 10, whatever. Processor is an AMD 1600 or an Intel Core i7-3770 with a 16 gigabytes RAM and a graphics card that is at minimum a 1060. That's the minimum.
Even the RAM requirements doesn't make sense for 720p. 16 gigs? Why?
Yeah. This is minimum for 720p at 30. The Forspoken recommended, which they say is, let me see. This is recommended. So this is if you have 1440p and you want to run this at 30. This is AMD Ryzen 5 3600, Intel Core i7-8700K, 24 gigabytes of memory, and then the minimum that you would need for a graphics card is a 3070, 8 gigs. That's recommended if you have 1440p for 30 frames per second, okay? The one that I told you that I said that was the actual recommended, which is the Ultra, is the 4080. You have to have I think it's an i9 13, I forget what the
it's an i7-12700K,
right,
for the processor on Intel side, and then a Ryzen 5 5800X for the AMD side. And then they're recommending a 16 gig graphic card, either an AMD Radeon RX 6800 XT or a GeForce RTX 4080, which,
oh god,
again, it's just like, why? These specs they're just overkill, and that's so I stand corrected on the minimum spec, but even at the minimum spec, the RAM requirement is just ludicrous.
Yeah,
I mean,
ridiculous.
Why 16 gigs? I mean, I don't think a bunch of other current AAA titles on minimum setting require that much RAM. I mean, I think at most I've seen maybe 8 gigs required as like minimum, maybe like 4 if you're running like absolute potato settings. But as far as how this links with my experience on PS5, in all honesty, it didn't seem like it was extremely pretty to warrant the insane spec that they're touting for the Ultra setting. I don't know. My gut feeling almost wonders if the PC version is just completely poorly optimized at this point, especially with these insane settings.
That is probably the case. I'm going to use this as an example of what you're saying. They are not one-to-one, but let's talk about the minimum requirements for One Piece Odyssey. One Piece Odyssey requires for a processor a i5 6600 or a Ryzen 5 2400G, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and at minimum a GeForce GTX 780. Recommended is an i5 8400 with a RAM of 8 gigabytes and a minimum recommended GTX 1060. These games are not one for one. They have different art styles and everything, but it belies the point that even newer games that are coming out don't need these insane amount of specs in order for them to work. And I guess the question I had for you is, I'm looking at these specs right here. I'm not seeing those specs being utilized in a way that makes me understand that, oh yeah, the graphics that I'm seeing right now justifies what I'm seeing for the Ultra. Does it for you?
Not really. I mean, they have some ray tracing stuff, but even in just the little bit that I played in the demo, the lighting wasn't absolutely perfect. Even still, just the fact that ray tracing is one of the big features, and it's just one of those things. It's like, okay, well, ray tracing, yeah, sure, okay. If you really want to tout the ray tracing, the RTX 2000 series can do it. And it's just like one of those things of, why are you requiring this almost like the second or third tier 30 series card? It's absolutely insane. And I mean, in theory, just the RTX 20 series should be able to do it. So that's why I'm kind of left scratching my head going, this recommended spec, even that is kind of like just overkill. But
Yeah.
at this point, I'm really starting to wonder why just no review site got a PC copy, because I'm just waiting for the potential shitstorm to happen tomorrow when the PC release drops, because I just have a feeling the Steam reviews from the user reviews are just going to dive overwhelmingly into the negative, and we're probably going to see something like game poorly optimized, stresses my system out to like 99% on the GPU and CPU load, and this thing has caused my gaming PC to melt or something. I mean, it almost sounds like like this could be another Crisis situation, if anyone remembers that little gem.
I remember that. Yeah, there were years where people were like, "Oh, but can it run Crisis?" I agree with you. And let's also speak to the fact that since we're talking about reviews, only certain outlets got reviews, got the copies at an early enough time. There were some outlets that got it for like 2 weeks previous, and then there were others that just got it over the weekend. But apparently all of them were able to actually play the game and review it. Square was being really squirrely with the review codes, apparently, with Forspoken. So we have that to contend with as well. Let's get right down to reviews then. The reviews of the game have been, I guess, mixed is the best way we can say them. Would you agree with that?
Mixed for breakdowns, if anyone's curious on statistics. We at Capital Games tend to use OpenCritic as kind of a barometer, mostly because OpenCritic does not bias one gaming outlet versus another. And as of this morning, it was sitting at an average score of 68%, with only 33% of the critics recommending it to everyone. And that's definitely not a good sign, especially if only a third of the critics who reviewed the game are comfortable enough to say, oh yeah, you should totally buy this game.
It's updated now. It's at a 69, nice, and it's at 28% critics recommended, so only a fourth of the critics recommend playing the game.
Yeah, the overall opinion seems to be that the game has a very good foundation. It just needs to fix, optimize, and fine-tune some things, and then maybe they could tighten it up to maybe salvage the game. But I just don't know if there's much that can be salvaged, because you've got bad pacing in the game, but some people quite like the lore. Then you have some people felt that the combat was slow, but they felt that the systems in the combat are very fun. There were some complaints that the movement was sloppy, but yet people love the movement options, techniques, and parkour. So it's one of those things that they're just bad, but there is some potential light if they decide to, I guess, try to patch some of the bad stuff out. But even still, there's only so much you can patch. Like the bad story pacing, I don't really think you can patch your way out of that unless you start really drastically changing the story post-release, but I just don't see it.
Yeah.
Ironically, one of the things that some critical reviews mentioned was that the game actually does include an option to stop Frey from making the random quips constantly. Which, in one of the days that we were prepping for one of the podcasts, I remember joking about it after playing the demo. I was just like, you know, it would be really funny if Square Enix ended up just putting a option to completely silence all the random quips and smart alecky remarks that Frey makes when she's kind of wandering around the main open world areas and everything. And then here I am just reading some of these critical reviews going, oh yeah, if you don't care much for Frey's chatter, yeah, there's an option in the options menu to turn that off. I was like, oh god.
Yeah.
They weren't confident in that dialogue, were they?
No. And this doesn't sound like an issue where God of War or Horizon Zero Dawn had the issue of when they quip, they accidentally give away the puzzle right away. This was more along the lines of, we know the writing is shit, so if you don't want to hear it, just turn it down to minimal. That's kind of what it sounds like to me at this point. I think that was generated, it was put on there because I think a lot of people in previews and as well as when they looked at commercials, they complained about the quippiness and I think they called it the just weedinification of dialogue when it came to Frey and what she was doing throughout the game. So that to me just sounds like they kind of knew that their writing was a little suspect. Here's what's happening now. So we have a mixed critical response. We have a new IP. We have a game that's going to be only on one console and on PC. The PC version seems to be very limited to who can actually play it in a consistent manner. Because if you can only get 720p at 30, it may not be worth buying at that point. I guess the question I have for you right now, Zero, is where do you think the sales will go on this? I'm going to preface this by saying we're going to go for first quarter sales, we're going to go for the year sales, and we're going to go lifetime. Lifetime is going to be very amorphous. I'm not going to hold you to it, but I would think the first quarter is going to be a little interesting. Let me compare this, Zero, to another game that was from Square Enix that was, I don't know, that was a new IP that came out, and I'll give you the sales for that one. That's Octopath Traveler. In the first week, Octopath Traveler had a sales number of about 350,000 in its first week, and after that, it looks like it sold worldwide as of 2022 3 million copies. Knowing that, what do you think the sales projection would be for Forspoken for first quarter?
In my opinion, with just how poorly received the demo was last year, and then just the commercials highlighting some of the worst parts of the dialogue, and I think that unfortunately has probably sunk a lot of people's expectations on this. I would say they'd be lucky to even be able to pass maybe 250,000 within the first quarter, just from just how poorly this is just coming together. And then seeing the final critical reviews, I presume most normal gamers are probably just going to end up skipping it or renting it, just waiting until it goes into almost a deep clearance-like sale.
Yeah, I agree that I think the audience that was interested in it are probably going to shy away from it. The critic reviews are not great. It is basically, and it's had some really bad promotional snafus as well when it comes to the game itself. But the thing is also, this is a PS5 exclusive. So people with PS5s who want games they can only get on their PS5, they are going to snatch this up. I don't think it's going to go as low as 250,000. I think it will reach at least for the first quarter about 500,000. But even with saying that would be a complete disappointment with Square Enix. I mean, Octopath Traveler getting 350,000 in its first week, within the first quarter, it probably reached around 500,000. And they were probably pleased as punch for that, okay? I think honestly, they need 5 million sales total to get in a good spot with this and to maybe possibly think about doing more and get a profit. I don't think it's going to come close to that. I think it'll be 500,000 after the first quarter. At the end, after a year, I think it will be about 750,000 unless they drop the price significantly in the next 3 months. I'll say this. If the game drops price by half in 3 months, then I can see sales going up for PlayStation 5 owners. Other than that, I think 500,000 in its first quarter, it reaches 750,000 by the year. What do you think about the year?
Probably concur with you that it'll be either 750K or maybe just a little bit shy of that number.
Okay.
Mostly because of the fact that just if Square gives no post-launch care to this, and then they just kind of go, oh, and write this off as, okay, we fucked up, we failed, so, just don't do anything to the game, don't patch it, don't bother with it, don't fuck with it, just leave it the hell alone. And then just the overall review from the common layperson ends up kind of being spread around of, oh yeah, don't buy this game on PS5, it's terrible, and it's totally overpriced at $70. If that ends up being a factor, then that's probably going to be lost sales there. And then, depending on how the PC release is handled tomorrow, I assume we'll find out how badly optimized the game is. And if it truly is as bad as it seems to be with the system requirements that they've posted, then yeah, I presume it's probably not going to make much headway on PC either. Especially since I think with the spec requirements on the minimum end, I don't even think you'd be able to run it on a Steam Deck even. So I think that potentially might be yet another potential loss on sales there too. So yeah, they'll be lucky if they can scrape with 750 by next year.
Now, comparing to Octopath Traveler, Octopath got 3 million in its total sales. I don't think it's going to reach that. I think it will reach, unless they put it out on other consoles eventually, and they significantly update them, I think 2 million is what's going to. Now,
I would say I'm a little conservative. I'd say maybe 1.25 million.
Wow. Okay.
And again, that's if they just leave this thing alone and just say, fuck this, it's a lost cause, we're not going to update it. And I mean, if they do choose to release it on Xbox Series X, it might get a little bit of shot in the arm, but once word makes its way around of, oh yeah, this is still the same bad game when it was on PS5, nothing has changed, nothing has been updated, so you're better off spending your money elsewhere. But if, and only if, this is something Square feels that they can redeem and that they want to redeem, maybe with releasing it on Xbox, maybe they can reach 2 million. Maybe.
So it looks like when it comes to console exclusivity, it's a 2-year console exclusive for PS5. So if they are going to release it on Xbox, it's going to be 2025 at minimum in January. So take that right out of the year, because if that's true and it's a 2-year console exclusive for PS5, then what it's getting is what it's getting this year. So did you want to update those numbers, or do you want to keep it where it is?
Well, I do want to add a bit of a provision, or I guess a potential clause.
Okay.
I do wonder if Sony has some sort of negotiation in their exclusivity contract that if the game underperforms after a certain period of time, that they just do away with the exclusivity agreement. If they're just like, we backed a bomb, this thing absolutely bombed, so yeah, forget it. We don't want to parade this thing on the front of the PlayStation Store. We don't want to parade this in front of all of our PlayStation ads because this thing was a fat turd. So, fuck it, Square. Take it to whoever the hell else wants it, and then just at that point, potentially opening it up to Xbox much sooner than the 2-year exclusivity.
Yeah, I don't think they would do that at all. I think if they really felt like they can get some kind of sales or some kind, unless Square Enix wants to give a concession back to Sony, they're going to keep it exclusive for those 2 years. They're not going to. They honestly do not care whether it is not feasible for Square Enix at that point. Square Enix signed the agreement, and I'm going to bet money that Sony at some point gave them money for the exclusivity. So
Yeah, there's a very likely chance that Sony probably funded some of the development in some way, and at that point, just I think the only other option would be just Sony coming down on Square, going, "Hey, you need to fix this turd. You need to get off your duff and get this thing fixed because this thing is absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
Fix it and fix it now."
that is a possibility. They could possibly do that. I think, to me, this is gonna, and this really depends on what the sales are like. If the sales are so bad that there's just no shot for it to make its projected sales, I think what you said before, which is basically, okay, done, we're done with it. I think that's more than likely going to happen. But if the sales are actually good, like if they go exceed expectations that we think it's going to make and it's going to hit, and they end up being really pretty good or enough to maybe have a sustainability to it where people will want to play the game even though it's kind of a mixed bag, I think then they'll start pouring money into the game to update it and to make it look better and to do more with it. It really just depends on sales. 'Cause if it bombs, they're going to be fine with just saying, all right, we bombed, bye, and that's it. So depends on sales, but I think the sales are going to be pretty substandard at this point. It looks like to me, I think we said this in the beginning too, it looks like to me, in order for this to be a success, 4 or 5 million total is probably what they need. And I don't think they're reaching that.
Yeah, no way. Especially just the fact that this was a Luminous Studio production. And these are the guys over at Square Enix, based out in Hawaii, that mostly work on cinematic stuff. So like the cutscenes and things like Kingdom Hearts and the Final Fantasy games. These are the guys who typically do those animated movie scenes and stuff like that. I think a majority of this team was also working on Final Fantasy 15 as well too, so take that for what you will. And just unfortunately they've just had a reputation for being very, very expensive on their production. And for anyone who really wants a trip back in time, this was also the same studio that was behind the Final Fantasy The Spirits Within.
Yes. Oh my god. And what an amazing story that is. I feel like I'm like one of 5 people who actually saw that in the theaters. Because every time I was like, oh man, I remember watching that in the theater. And every time I say that and go, you saw that in the theaters? Yeah. And it was empty too when I watched it. But yeah, okay. But do you want to add any more details to this before we sign off?
I think something that has come up that was a bit comical, maybe a bit sneaky and underhanded of Square, it happened right before we had started recording and everything. Apparently there's a giant Twitter thread with Zach Verge, and he had noticed something in the Forspoken launch trailer. In the trailer, it's peppered with one-word accolades. And these accolades are completely without any context. I know some sites have quoted some of the choice words that they picked. One of the quotes was beautiful, and that was taken from Distractify, but the full context was that in Distractify's evaluation of the demo that was released in December, they felt that the world was beautiful, but the game still had its flaws. I think one of the other words that was quoted in this trailer that a lot of people have been kind of talking about is the word impressive by Game Informer. And that was without the entire context of where that word impressive came from. And if I remember correctly from some of the threads discussing it, the full review from Game Informer felt that the game was impressive but had its own set of problems. Yeah, it was just kind of like, ooh, that's very sneaky, very underhanded, but actually a bit kind of comical for them to do this. I think this is just going to be a glorious, glorious trash fire to watch over the next week. And I'll be real curious to see what the opinions are by next week, or if Square Enix executives say something, or even somebody from the Forspoken development team says, maybe a major significant patch is coming or something.
Yeah, so we will look forward to what happens in the next 3 months, 6 months when that happens. What do you think, Zero? Do you think we should come back to these when we find out what happens? Or should we just leave it out in the ether and people will be like, hey, you said this and you were wrong, so what? And you're like, oh, really? Oh, bye.
I mean, it might be interesting to revisit in the next couple months.
Okay.
But yeah, it will be something that I'll be very curious to see if they can turn the ship around, because it's just not looking good with the reviews. Mostly sitting in the mixed area, with a lot of people, again, just kind of saying, we think that this game has a great foundation, but it really needs a lot of love and a lot of work to make the most out of it. And we can potentially see that being a good thing if Square puts in the work, but if they don't, then yeah, this is just going to be one hell of a stinker.
Yeah, I'm sorry. $70 for a good foundation ain't gonna cut it.
Yeah.
You're charging me $70. Like, yeah, we got something here. Yeah, I don't care. I'm not spending $70 on it. So, yeah, that's on them. Okay, that's it for Capital Games on this episode. Tune in next time, and we'll see what happens in the news throughout the week. I'm the Wiz.
I'm Zero.
And we'll talk to you next time. Bye.